The views expressed on the Nova Society are those of the panelists and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the Phoenix Research Institute or any institution which any panel member is associated. Reproduction or dissemination, other than for the purpose of education or information without the express written permission of the Phoenix Research Institute or Nova Society Media, is strictly prohibited. We'd like to welcome everyone back to the Nova Society, and today our regular panel will be joined by Dr. Nancy Rosenblum and Dr. Russel Muirhead, as we discuss their concept of ungoverning and how it relates to the Trump administration. Ungovernance, but doesn't ungovernance start with the mood of the electorate? Isn't that what gives them that ability to have this kind of government that we have? And I've always said, you get the government you deserve. And we had great faith, but the fact is that we had great faith in the American populace looking at this and saying, this is a bad idea. We can't do this. But it seems that they said, yeah, okay, we accept this. Don't we have to start with changing the mindset of the American populace, those voters, getting voters coming back out? 32% of Democrats voted. Only 34% of Republicans voted. Getting people re-engaged into the process, or are we ungovernable because of the mood of the voting populace? Have the voters created this situation all simply by being disengaged and just basically throwing up their hands and saying, yeah, the American dream was always a fantasy, it never existed, just whatever, bring back the King of England?
Yeah, there you go. Bring back the King of England. Bring back that kind of monarchic power. Mark, I think you're onto something. Look, most Americans today think the system is broken. There are very few Americans who think that their political system is in good shape, is in good repair, is working well. I mean, when you look at like right track, wrong track numbers, this is, the United States of America is an 85% wrong track country right now. And large numbers of Democratic voters think that the system is broken. So that's the backdrop to ungoverning. When people think that the system is broken, then the only way to really win an election is to issue some kind of promise, some kind of convincing case that you can fix the system. Now I have to say, Kamala Harris was not able to do that. She was essentially running an incumbent, campaign saying everything was good under the last president. That doesn't address the sense that the system is broken. That doesn't address people, the 80% who think the country's on the wrong track. Now, what I think people are vulnerable to when they think that the system itself is broken is believing that the only kind of people who can repair it are those who don't believe in the system. In particular, a strongman, a kind of reformed monarch who gallops in on a white horse, and who alone can fix it, to borrow a phrase from Donald Trump. And when you see that image on inauguration night of Trump sitting in the Capital One arena, sitting at that little desk with the presidential seal in the middle of this arena, signing these executive orders, to the delight of the crowd, I alone can fix it. Look at one example, the executive order saying we're not going to follow the law and the Supreme Court decision about TikTok. There was a bipartisan, piece of legislation passed with respect to TikTok. You can disagree with it. You can say it's a stupid law, but it was passed. The Supreme Court interpreted it in a very straightforward way. And TikTok, bylaw can't operate as a consequence. Trump says, I'm going to stay the implementation of that decision. I mean, under what power can he stay it? And if you look at the brief he signed, in prior to the Supreme Court decision in the Supreme Court, he said, the brief said Donald Trump is such an extraordinary leader that the Supreme Court shouldn't step in right now. The Supreme Court should delegate this to Donald Trump because he alone can figure out how to fix the TikTok problem. And so, it's not a matter of laws, like laws don't count. Laws are part of the broken system. We don't have to pay attention to laws. Let's have the strong man just impose the solution. And whether it's in foreign policy, whether it's, with respect to, domestic corporations or just a policy like TikTok, that promise of the strongman is what I think a lot of Americans are gravitating to as an answer to their sense that the system is broken. And those of us who are, very concerned about the way the promise of the strongman can lead to authoritarianism, it's incumbent on us to talk about how to fix the system. We have to address this background public mood and public conviction that the system doesn't work.
Well, and just to follow up before I turn it over to Scott, I got an email yesterday. Of course, yesterday it snowed in New Orleans, which it never snows in New Orleans. And somebody sent me, actually to the podcast, see, Donald Trump fixed global warming on day one. And I'm sitting there looking at it going, that's insane. We're talking insanity here. Donald Trump just fixed global warming because it's snowing in New Orleans. So you don't know the difference between global warming and a thing called weather. But yeah. I found that to be terribly funny that was it. What do you got, Scott?
One of the we talk about our faith in the people, right? And I don't have any anymore. And one of the reasons that I don't have any anymore is because of the blatant corruption that has to be obvious to everybody. I mean, it's certainly obvious, I'm sure, to everybody on this call right now that TikTok simply paid Trump to interfere here and to keep TikTok going. I mean, it doesn't seem like there's any other, the Chinese government or the owner of TikTok, I think, donated to his inaugural fund, and Trump reversed his position because he's the one who came out and said that TikTok originally was spying on Americans and a national threat. And now he's completely flip-flopped. We saw it yesterday also with what I probably think is the worst of his pardons and commutations, which was Russ Ulbricht. And if you're not familiar with his case, he was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences plus 40 years for his crimes. Now, his crime seems to be based on something called the Silk Road, which he developed as a dark web marketplace where you could literally buy anything you want anonymously. Guns, children, drugs, all kinds of snuff films seem to be very popular on there. And he himself used the site to hire hitmen to kill people that he didn't like. Whether those people got killed or not is still not clear, and I don't think he's been charged with that yet, so I should say allegedly. But he's been pardoned. The reason for the pardon, in the pardon itself, is that the Libertarian Party asked Trump to, and the Libertarian Party supports Russ Ulbricht, and they wanted this to happen. So as a quid pro quo, Trump is letting this guy out of prison. And nobody seems to care. Nobody seems to care that he and his wife came out with these Bitcoin, mechanisms to accept bribes from people without having them pretend to stay at one of his hotels. So the American people are looking at Trump saying, yeah, he's really corrupt. He's making billions of dollars right now, and they seem fine with it. And that's why I've lost my faith in the American people and the voters. With regard to right way, wrong way, that's the biggest problem with that question, because half of us think the country is going the wrong way in one way, and half of us think that the country is going wrong way in exactly the opposite way.
I wanted to say something about this whole approach we're on the wrong track. And that's what's explaining. The problem is that there are lots of wrong tracks, right? And what Trump has managed to do is to embody the right track on all 3 of these things. I mean, that's really quite an extraordinary accomplishment. So one is the wrong track is because we need a strong man. And he clearly, and you all have discussed this a great deal, that he represents the capacity to whatever you need fixed, he can fix it, right? That this is a matter of personal will. But the other wrong track, and we've sort of lost sight of this for some reason in the last very recently, is all of these people who think that we're on the wrong track in what we could call DEI, about race, about the status and freedom of women, about not being a Christian nation. And it's a miraculous thing. It's a sign of political genius that Trump has also gotten these people to support him, right? This is a man who has no respect for women, who is clearly something of a racist himself, who certainly doesn't want a Christian nation. And yet this wrong track too, he has appropriated as something that he can fix. And then there's a third element going on here, which is this question of money and these billionaires that he's brought in. Now, why isn't it that the American people see this as a wrong track instead of a right one? But they don't. They don't. Maybe they think that the price of the willfulness and on the matters of race and social composition and so on is to allow a kleptocracy. Or maybe they simply adore billionaires, right? But at any rate, my point is that there is not one, but several wrong tracks, and that the genius of Trump and his movement and of the Republican Party, which has submitted to him, is to present himself as the answer to all of these.
Yeah, and I would totally agree with that. I mean, I was speaking with a friend the other day, and he goes, well, can't you admit that the United States is going to hell in the handbasket? I said, yes, I can admit that. The only difference is your handbasket is different than mine. And that's really what it comes down to. What you see as the problem is something totally different of what I see as the problem. So I guess the follow-up to all that would be, where do you see this heading? I mean, will the system, I believe the system will hold. Scott is a little bit more cynical about this than I am. I truly believe the cynical will hold. I also believe maybe the Mets will sign Pete Alonso, so I could be totally wrong about all of that. But the fact is that where do you see this going? Can this great experiment survive another 4 years?
Well, there will be an election in 2 years, and
Yes.
And the mood right now is very, very disconnected from that election. That's fine. It feels like a million, years away, but it's actually going to come fairly quickly. So Trump will get 6 months where he can initiate, I think, with a fairly free hand, with a lot of cooperation from Congress. He'll have about 6 months to basically set the template for his whole administration, and he'll either squander it or use it or some mix of the two. We'll see. But after that, starting in about September, October of 2025, I think that the dynamic within the Republican Party is going to shift. As of yesterday, Trump was a lame duck. He is a lame duck, at least as far as the Constitution goes. He can't run again. There are a lot of ambitious people in the Republican Party. His Secretary of State, his Vice President, two people, for example, who would like to become President of the United States. Everything they're thinking right now is everything. Every single second of the day, J.D. Vance is thinking, how do I become president? Every second of the day, Marco Rubio's thinking, how do I become president? And there are a dozen or 24 other very ambitious Republicans who are spending all their waking moments thinking exactly, wondering about exactly the same question. And they're going to sometimes cooperate with Trump and align with him because they think that will, they want to command his movement. But they're also going to depart from him. And they're only going to use him and his movement insofar as it elevates and advances them. So there's going to be a lot of competition within the Republican Party, and the effect of those rival ambitions is going to become much more visible in the second half of this year. The Democrats, who are disoriented and defeated right now, and also who can't command any attention because there isn't a single Democrat who occupies a leadership position in the country that has any visibility. So they're invisible, and it's impossible to hear from them right now. The Democrats are going to be the opposition party 2 years from now, and they're going to be the party that people gravitate to in the midterm elections, who are frustrated with certain aspects, maybe the kleptocracy and corruption that they'll see over the next 2 years. So anyway, I think 2 years from now, it's going to feel a little bit different. But look, to really combat this, the promise of the strongman, and the satisfactions of ungoverning. And one thing that Nancy and I write about is how ungoverning can be satisfying because it offers change right now. It offers immediacy. We saw that again yesterday during Monday during the inauguration. We saw this. We're going to change things right now. There was a headline in the Wall Street Journal, corporations setting up war rooms to deal with the blizzard of executive orders. So much is happening right now. We can hardly even read about it, much less digest it and respond to it. So this kind of like right nowness, this immediacy, stands in real contrast to the slow work of governing, the incredibly frustrating work of governing, where you pass a policy. Let's just say, think back to the 1970s, American rivers filled with sewage, lighting up on fire, pass a Clean Water Act. Well, you don't get clean water the next day. It's not like an executive order and 10 minutes later the rivers are clean. It takes 2 decades for rivers to be cleaned, to build sewage treatment plants, to lay in the piping, So policies take a long time. Governing takes a long time. It's not nearly as satisfying. And so the promise of ungoverning, I think the satisfactions of it will live on even after Trump passes from the scene, and he will pass from the scene. And so on one hand, Nancy and I are drawing attention to certain aspects, innovations, very, very disturbing innovations that Trump is bringing to American politics. On the other hand, we don't want to tie these just to Donald Trump. And the question going forward is like, will these rivals, people like J.D. Vance or Marco Rubio, will they want to govern or will they want to ungovern?
Well, there's more another question attached to what you just said, Russ, which is that I think that what you're talking about here is this question of political time. And there are 2 ways of looking at political time. One is through the regular but slow mechanism of elections, every 2 years, every 4 years, whatever. And the other is the political time of a movement, right? Or of an autocrat, which is the right now political time. And the question is really, which is looking ahead, which is going to make any difference? I mean, whether these 2-year elections and 4-year elections are going to be enough, right, to put an end to it, or whether, and here's what I think. In fact, we wrote this last night when we were writing another essay, that that it's unlikely that anybody will be able to take over and sustain the movement that Trump has. So I think that whoever his heirs are, the people looking ahead, whether it's Vance or Rubio or anybody else, are going to have to go back into what we think of as regular political time. But the movement aspect of this can't be sustained past Trump. And then what will happen to the Republican Party? It's never going to return to the old conservative republicanism that it has been, for generations. What will happen to this party and to the political system is really an open question. But I think that with the end of Trump will come the end of movement and right now, and we'll see what else opens up.
I don't often quote Hemingway, but yes, isn't it pretty to think so comes to mind. Isn't it pretty to think so? Because the other alternative is that Junior becomes the next leader of the country, and or worse, possibly yet, Barron. And we really may have turned the corner here on the Republic. We really may be entering royal family mode here, and it won't be J.D. Vance and it won't be Marco Rubio. It'll be one of his kids, and the people, idiots that they are, will go along with it. And he's going to control the media. He already has the biggest part of it. And we've all abandoned, I'll bet everybody here no longer watches CNN or MSNBC because it's just either too depressing or too like pie in the sky, like whatever it is that they're talking about. It just seems ridiculous right now. And Trump went out and had a crony of his buy Univision. And now they're not, they were one of the best bulwarks against him in the first administration. They're not there anymore. They're fully supportive of Trump. So he's picked that up from Orban. And the people are willing to go along with it. If they're willing to go along with his corruption, if they're willing to go along with the crazy stuff that he's going to do, right? Like tell the weather people, hey, you know what? It's not 6 degrees in Connecticut today. It's 70 degrees in Connecticut today. Take your shirt off and go out there and play. And there are people who are willing to do that. I have, yes, I've lost my faith in the American people. You talk about the 2 directions that this could go in your book. One is towards India, towards a more authoritarian dictatorship type of government, and the other is to utter chaos like Venezuela. I'm going to vote for Venezuela. Mark said I'm bad at predicting things, and I am, but I think we're headed down that path where we have a rentier state, where rent seekers like Elon Musk are going to be out there demanding fat government contracts, where tariffs are going to replace income tax for revenue, and tariffs are paid by consumers. And 2/3 or 70% of our economy is based on consumerism. We, the consumer, are the natural resource of this rentier state. They are going to continue to pluck us. And we saw this when the people were complaining most about gas prices. They were still filling up their boats and going out there on the Long Island Sound. They still fill up those big pickup trucks. They complain about it, but they continue to do it. And as long as the American consumer can keep consuming, the tariffs will be used to skim enough money to run the government and pay off the rent seekers their rents that will keep them supporting Trump or the heir apparent.
And we will finish our conversations with Dr. Muirhead and Dr. Rosenblum in our next episode. We hope you join us. The Nova Society is a production of Nova Society Media, a division of the Phoenix Research Institute. We'd like to thank our production partners, Buzzsprout, who hosts the Nova Society, Audacity, our editing partners, Apple iTunes, the largest source of podcasts and music on the internet, Spotify, the most popular platform for the Nova Society, and iHeartRadio, your source for all things music and podcasting. The Nova Society is available on all of these and other quality platforms listed in our description. We'd also like to thank all of our listeners. Without your support, the Nova Society would not be possible. If you have a question or a comment, we can be reached at nova.society.podcast@gmail.com. So for Dr. Brooklyn Van Weldon, Dr. Priscilla Hobbs, Dr. Scott Gershwer, and all of us here at the Nova Society, I'm Dr. Mark Bound. Remember, the true power in society is knowledge. Thanks for listening, and we will see you again next time. We'd like to thank our sponsor for this episode, the Journal of Interdisciplinary Conflict Science. The JCIS is an open journal for upcoming scholars. The JCIS is currently accepting article submissions on an ongoing basis. JCIS is a publication of Nova Works, a scholarly repository at Nova Southeastern University. A link to the journal is in our description.